Let's practice looking for error correction in real-life scenarios, so we can connect philosophy to life better. This video pairs with my article explaining the error correction in several clips. To summarize briefly, the point is, we need to build up our philosophy skills by practicing things. Math and grammar are two good examples of things that people know how to practice, which have some relevance. But it's hard to find enough things to practice to work your way all the way up to being a good philosopher. So spotting error correction is another type of practice that's a bit more philosophical, and people don't usually do it or anything like it. So I'm going to look at clips from machine picks. In general, machines try to accomplish some sort of purpose. They have a goal. And to accomplish goals, you need error correction. Otherwise, you would fail at the goal due to things going wrong. So the tubing helps prevent the error of the fish going all over the place on the grass. The water in the tube helps prevent the error of the fish drying out. I think there's water in the tube. It's hard to see exactly. Yeah, it looks like there's water. It also helps prevent fish from getting stuck because it keeps pushing them forward. This is a very simple example. You can understand it with common sense. The idea is to start looking at things in a more philosophical way and get more used to that. So it's good to start with examples that aren't actually hard. So here you intuitively understand that their goal is to get fish into the lake, and they don't want the fish to be on the land. They also want it to be relatively easy and quick. They don't want to pick up the fish one by one and throw them in the lake. And even if they did do it that way, they'd probably drop some. Some of the fish could get injured. So the tube and the pump and the water, all those things help them accomplish their goal rather than getting some other outcome they don't want. The machine here helps portion things into the correct sizes. It helps avoid the error of having wrong-sized ice cream bars. The main goal of the machine, I think, is to save labor. Using unnecessary labor could also be considered an error. It's better to do it in an automated fashion. But the more standard error correction aspect, I think, is the portion sizing being more accurate. It avoids people making uneven portions. The method they're using here has a lot of robustness. The tree could be a different size or shape. The pollen could be stuck to the tree a little more strongly or a little less strongly, and this method is going to work regardless. So it has a good resilience. It's not dependent on the specific details of the tree and the pollen. So if there are minor errors, minor variants, if the tree is a little bit out of the predicted scope of what tree you're expecting and designing this process for, it can still work. This kind of process, besides saving labor, has a lot of consistency for how much paint it puts in each spot. If you had humans doing it, you'd get a lot of variance there, and it's preventing those errors by making it more consistent. Also, how does it avoid paint getting outside of the grooves? That would be an error. I think what it's doing is putting paint in the middle of certain areas, and then the paint settles down a little bit. It expands, flows outward. So it's not just painting the exact area that should be painted, it's leaving a margin of error around the edges, and then the paint moves there by itself because it's liquid. Whereas if you tried to directly paint the exact edges, it'd be very hard to make it perfect. A potential error here would be if the potatoes just kept flowing while the new truck is coming up, and then they'd all fall on the ground. So the mechanism that is able to stop the conveyor belt helps prevent that error. I guess there's some sort of buffer where the potatoes can accumulate while it's waiting for the next truck to come. Another error correction mechanism are the guardrails. They help prevent potatoes from falling off to the sides. It's also shooting debris out the back. there's some mechanism in there which we can't see, which separates potatoes from dirt. Not perfectly, but a decent amount. It's getting rid of a fair amount of dirt and not very many potatoes. I think it might just be getting rid of stuff that weighs less than potatoes. Basically, the heavy things are falling down and the lighter things are getting blown away. So probably a rock could get through there, but most debris doesn't. This machine adds a lot of precision. If you had people doing this by hand, they would make lots and lots of tiny errors.
Unbelievable.
The main error they're trying to avoid there is the building falling on other buildings. They did a good job with it. When helicopters fly, they constantly get a tiny bit off course. The pilot corrects these errors by watching where he's going, watching where he is, and making minor steering adjustments. They didn't get enough water the first time they dipped the bucket, but they were able to see this and dip it a second time to correct that error. An error they did not correct was blowing away the pool furniture. So I guess this is some sort of error testing. They're trying to figure out which ones break over time, how quickly they break, whether they get squeaky, whether they fall apart. I don't know exactly what they're testing for. But the whole point of the testing is they want these things to work correctly. So they're using them a bunch in this test scenario to see what things go wrong. So it's part of an error correction process. If they knew there would be no errors, everything would just work perfectly, then they wouldn't bother with this test yard. What would be the point? This kind of robotic stuff is often pretty fragile to errors. If things go wrong, it's often not programmed to know how to fix it or anything. It's reliant instead on avoiding a lot of errors in the first place, because the robot is precisely controlled. The way it moves is determined by software and machine parts, rather than human brains and human arms that have more variance in their motions. So major error here would be falling down. And he's got those hooks to help avoid that risk. I assume at all times there's a hook attached, like he puts the new one on, but there's probably a different one that's still attached. So when he's putting one hook on, there should be a different one protecting him. You can't see it though. So the spray helps with the error of the crepe getting stuck to the pan. They're using a non-stick spray of some sort, probably an oil. They're also going to get more consistent crepe sizes this way than if they had humans doing it. We can't see the mechanism, but I think they have some sort of fairly precise, good mechanism that decides how much batter to shoot onto the pan-like surface. One way this deals with errors is you can overlap it a little bit and it still looks okay. The way the pattern is designed, you're probably not going to notice very much if you don't have perfect stripes of it and instead have bits of overlap and even some small gaps. The one potential error if used fixed height cranes is having the crane be the wrong height. Having adjustable height cranes lets you change that to get them to the height you need. One of the main reasons for them is that construction jobs often need different height cranes at different times. Like you build something up and it gets taller and taller, so you need a taller crane. as you're further along in the process. Another type of error they're trying to avoid is dropping these heavy metal things. So they have strong cables, and I don't know exactly what other mechanisms are involved, but I assume there are several design features that help avoid that error, but you can't really see what they are from the video. You could look it up and research it, though, if you're curious. This is Instagram. I don't know if it's all the same ones or somewhat different. Some of these I don't remember, like, I think all three of these right here. Automatic underground parking system. So one thing it has is excess capacity on the weight limit. You could put in a car that's a little bit too heavy. Like you could leave some of your belongings in the car, adding extra weight, and it would still work fine. It's hard to see how it works. Like what is causing the dough that comes out to turn into those balls and then fall? I guess there's something on the inside, but we can't really see it. One error that I see it's trying to avoid is the balls all stacking up on top of each other. It wants them all to be in the oil instead of in a big pile. So it's moving back and forth to drop the balls into different places. Some sort of wave machine. It's for some sort of research purpose. So they do have the guardrails that keeps the wave in the trough. It avoids the error of the wave getting on the people standing next to it. I don't know in detail what their goals are or how the machine avoids the errors. I think a lot of the error correction is in the machine at the beginning rather than in the thing we're seeing here, the wave itself. By the time we see it down here, it's already created and it's just living out its destiny, kind of. It's no longer being actively controlled by the designers. So, like, if halfway down the trough, the wave was in the wrong shape, there is no mechanism that would fix it. The sides would help keep it from splashing out, but there's nothing that would put it back into the right shape for whatever research they're doing if it somehow got into the wrong shape. But there are some sort of error correction features in the original machine so that the waves can be fairly reliably created to the right specifications. Oh, this is trying to open a combination lock. So this can help with the error that you lost the combination to your lock and you need to get your safe open. When stuff works with computers and machine arms and this kind of thing, it's hard to see the error correction at work because it's hidden inside in the computer chip and stuff. There's small parts that we can't see. Like, the reason it's so precise involves some sort of error correction. If you had no error correction, you got a bunch of variance, it wouldn't precisely go to the right numbers. It, over and over again, goes to just the intended numbers that the software wants it to check. So there's some sort of error correction happening somewhere. It's just not really visible in the video. You'd have to understand how the software works, how the hardware works, how the mechanisms work, what makes them so precise and prevents them from getting out of sync, out of alignment, that kind of thing. This is a manual process, so there's a human watching what's happening. There is a machine involved, but there's human judgment as well. So if something goes wrong, he can see it and pull the thing out and try to figure out what to do about it. You can imagine how this avoids a lot of the variance you would get if you're banging on this with a hammer. So it's partly a machine process. You're getting the machine precision for how far it pushes down. Which again gets into there is a computer controlling it probably. And it is built in a way that has accurate, precise control over its motions. But we can't see exactly what mechanisms it has somewhere that make its motion so precise and accurate. One of the main error correction features here is the driver is using an overlap pattern. He can overlap what he's already done a little bit to avoid missing spots. Also, these mechanical blades are resilient to the dirt being non-uniform. there can be small variations in the dirt. Some of the dirt can be imperfect, and this still works. The pieces of metal on the back that direct the flow of earth are designed so it doesn't overlap very much. Like they're trying to put it in neat rows instead of in a giant pile that's really tall and uneven. It keeps it reasonably even. So they're trying to avoid an error there of having all the dirt in one place. I guess their main purpose is to flip the dirt over, but the design of putting them spaced out helps keep the dirt spaced out in a reasonable way. You can imagine a different configuration where one of those pieces of metal was a foot to the right, and you would end up with like two big pieces of dirt stacked on top of each other and then a big gap. That would be bad. This is a thing you can practice not just with video clips, although you can do that, but in your whole life. You can look around and think about how are these things supposed to work? What are their goals? What does success look like? What does failure look like? And what is some sort of design element or policy that is helping get success rather than failure? So another simple one is that this device has a bunch of metal. If instead of metal it had thin plastic, it would get failure instead of success. It wouldn't be strong enough. The metal is significantly stronger, sturdier, more rigid than the dirt, which lets it cut and do this job. Whereas if you use something that was more flimsy than the dirt, it wouldn't work. There are always going to be many, many things you could notice and point out. Don't aim for completeness. Just brainstorm a couple and move on. Brainstorm a couple and move on, and do that a lot and get used to it. And try to figure out which ones are particularly important or notable, what's non-standard, and try to highlight that kind of thing more. If you do a lot of this, it will train your subconscious to think more along the lines of what you did consciously and practiced. Whatever you spend time practicing, your subconscious is going to work more like that. So there's a way to improve your subconscious to see the world more in terms of important philosophical concepts like error, error correction, goals, success, failure. Watching this video is not nearly enough. Doing the amount of practice that I did in this video is also not enough. You need to do more than that if you want to be very good at thinking. And you have to actually do it yourself, not just watch someone else do it. It's also important to say your answers out loud or write them down to get them outside of your head. You can do some practice just with thinking to yourself, but some of it should be externalized. One thing that'll help do is connect your thinking related to error and error correction to language. It'll help make it easier to put your thoughts into words if some of your practice involves putting them into written or spoken words. When you're just thinking to yourself, it's often not fully in proper words that would make sense to other people, and you're often not aware of how many steps you're skipping.